Hello, my name is Mrs. Tessa Rose Mahmoudi, and today we're going to be talking about the history of horticulture. To start off, I want to talk about the needs of humans. A helpful tool when describing needs of humans is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We all need food and water, and we get these from horticulture, such as the food that we eat and the supplies for making the shelters that we need to get warmth and safety. Horticulture meets other needs for humans as well, but the variation of the needs that are met may vary depending on your connection to horticulture. Some people's psychological needs are met with horticulture, such as spending time in their garden, or outside in nature, or by the beauties that nature provides, such as cut flowers. Others find the highest of needs in horticulture, such as through their career or for their passions or through their hobbies. Someone who has a career in landscape design or landscape architecture and really enjoys their work might be finding their needs of self-fulfillment within horticulture, or someone who has a floral shop and really enjoys it. As we start this discussion, I want you to reflect on what you ate today and where it came from. Also start to think about who grows your food. Where do you source your food, and are there other ways to source your food? And lastly, are you happy with the types of food available to you? As you start to reflect on what you ate today, you might begin to wonder, where did it actually come from? You probably bought it at a grocery store. But where did it come from before that? Did it come from a facility where they're processing that food? Or did it come directly from a farmer or a network of farmers? So this system where our food comes from has changed a lot in the last 100 years and even more before that. So I want to talk about the history of how humans have obtained foods and the different options that we have for obtaining foods and how that's changed over time and how that's allowed our society to change. So, thinking to the most basic way that we can find food is just directly entering nature and foraging for plants, such as finding blueberries and then eating them, or wild raspberries. Or going out and hunting for animals that can be used for food. You've probably heard of hunter-gatherer societies that follow game throughout the year, moving their families, finding wild berries, and really having this lifestyle of following your food and moving around a lot. In modern times, we do some hunting and gathering. Hunting and foraging is what we usually refer to them nowadays. These are 4 of my favorite plants to forage or find in the wilderness and actually eat. So the one I'll talk about first is the one with these little yellow flowers. So this is called purslane plant, and it's found all over the world really. It's a very drought tolerant plant, very easy to find. Often you can find it just growing in sidewalks. Very high on omega-3s. You can eat it raw or you can saute it. The one underneath is more of a medicinal plant. It's called plantain, and it can be used as a natural coagulant. So if you find yourself or somebody else or an animal that is bleeding a lot from an open wound, you can find this plant. It's pretty easy to find, especially because of the big leaves. Take the leaves, put them in your mouth, chew them up, which activates some of the compounds within the leaf. And then you put that on the wound, and it actually stops the bleeding as a natural coagulant. So if you find yourself in a dire situation, that could save you or someone else's life. This plant has been known to save a lot of dogs' lives after being attacked by bears. Alright, this next one, this maroon flowered plant, is called yellow dock. And this is a plant that you will find with these dark maroon colors in the fall when it's dry. You can harvest this as a seed and make a flower. So what you do is you take the stalk of the yellow dock and you strip all of its seeds off. You can put them on a cookie sheet. And that one, what you'll want to do is take the seeds, rub them in your hands pretty vigorously, and that will get some of the basically seed coat off. And then you can grind those seeds up, make a flour, and make crackers and other things. Very high in iron and protein, really good survival food. The last one that I'll talk about is this plant called stinging nettle. You might recognize the jagged leaves as something that made you sting while you're walking in the wilderness. This plant does indeed sting, but you can pick the leaves, specifically the new growth leaves. They sting less. You can pick the leaves of any part of the plant with gloves, boil them just like you'd boil spinach, and eat them. Very highly nutritious plant, but of course you have to be careful of the stinging. Other people find a lot of value and even thrift in hunting and fishing, other ways to gather food. Another way of sourcing food that you may be a little bit less familiar with is agroforestry. So think of the forest and agriculture coming together, and there you have it, is agroforestry. So you're growing food within a canopy, so you are using one area of land to grow many different types of crops together. And people have found that when you're growing certain types of crops that are compatible, that they'll actually grow better together than alone. For example, you can grow banana trees with mango trees and tomato plants underneath them. So this is a really cool way of doing agriculture, very sustainable for the environment, and a way that you can live in harmony with the land. This has been specifically helpful in areas that were previously rainforests but had been deforested. There's a foundation called the Renature Foundation, and they take land that had been destroyed and they replant plants there that it can also be used for food crops. So two great things that they're doing. They're increasing the health of that land, and they're also providing food for surrounding communities. Really cool projects that they're doing. Agroforestry, this type of way of sourcing food, was also described in historical texts such as the Bible, as the Bible describes the Garden of Eden as this place with lush fruits and vegetables and trees growing intermixed, along with animals and flowing water. So reading from the Bible, Genesis says, "Now the Lord God had planted a garden in the east, in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed. The Lord God made all kinds of trees grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. In the middle of the garden were the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. A river watering the garden flowed from Eden. From there it was separated into 4 headwaters." So here, especially in verse 9, you can see that there was trees that were good for food, and really describing this paradise sort of place, that there was animals, people, and also all of this food to eat. So really describing agroforestry here. The Quran also mentions this in chapter 2, verse 35. "And we said, O Adam, dwell you and your wife in paradise, and eat therefrom in ease and abundance from wherever you will, but do not approach this tree, lest you be among the wrongdoers." So I really like that it's also describing having food in abundance and ease. So agroforestry is really that system that has food to eat from forest trees from above the canopy, and then the plants growing in the shade will also provide food. So a really healthy ecosystem type. If you are familiar with the historical texts of the Bible, you'll know that it also describes the hunter and gatherer type society after Adam and Eve left the garden. So moving on to these different types of obtaining food, you might wonder, why shift away from the hunter-gatherer lifestyle or the agroforestry lifestyle? You may understand that in these specific lifestyles, they do not support extremely high populations. So as populations increased, the animal life and the plant life, especially in certain areas, got stressed. And you can imagine some years the herds of animals used for that are hunted would be in varying levels. So some years would be really great hunting, other years not so good. So this really affects the amount of people that you could support in this lifestyle. It's thought that hunter-gatherers started planting, or what we would call horticulture, growing food in a garden, first with medicinal plants. So plants that they found to have medicinal properties, those are the ones that they first started to gather the seeds and realize the importance of having them all year round. Think of the plantain plant that can help with the blood coagulant. That's something that you'd want around all the time. So if you're a very observant person, you might know that, okay, so I'm going to gather these seeds and I'm going to grow it with me so that if someone that I care about, someone in my group, gets a large wound, I can solve that issue. So that's how it kind of started with cultivating plants, and then went forward with actually domesticating different crop plants along with animals. So realizing that certain plants were really good for eating, cultivating those, and doing something that we call plant breeding. Taking the seeds of one crop plant, planting it the next year, taking the seeds of the largest of those seeds, and then planting them again. Over time, we get plants that are larger, have larger seeds, larger type, better taste, more nutrition, etc. So again, the hunter and gatherer society, lots of movement, a little bit less reliable. Horticulture, a lot more work, effort put in, but a little bit more reliable. Putting in this as well is kind of a joke. You can think fast food. You don't really work for the food. You get it on the go, kind of like hunter and gatherers, versus horticulturists spending time at home, making a plan, gathering the food that you need, just like gathering the seeds that you need and planting them. So cooking at home can kind of be related to a more horticultural society. So as the first people started doing horticulture, or cultivation of plants, it allowed their populations to get larger. So the first people that are hunter and gatherers did not do a great deal of work or effort to grow their own food. They just relied on what nature provided. When humans first began cultivating edible plants, populations were able to rise, and a lot of information about how to grow plants, what seeds to grow, was really passed along through word of mouth storytelling. So where did horticulture and agriculture first start? There's some famous areas where a lot of crops were domesticated and where their centers of diversity are. So the Fertile Crescent is known for where wheat comes from, Mesoamerica where corn came from, the Andes where potatoes were domesticated, and so on. So a little bit more about crop domestication and what that looks like. So right here you can see this grass looking like plant, and that is actually the ancestor of corn. Believe it or not, corn's ancestor was very small. So you can see the seed head compared to the size of a quarter, it's tiny compared to our modern day corn, which is much larger than a quarter. So through many generations of taking the largest seeds, planting them, taking the largest seeds, planting them, we have the domestication of our modern day corn. Same thing happened with wheat. You've probably seen grasses that look like this in the wilderness. These and other types of grasses form together to form our modern day wheat. So another example of crop domestication. Really cool stories there to look into. Different crops originated or come from different areas. In North America, our claim to fame is sunflowers, pumpkins, and blueberries. Other areas, especially Asia, have many different crops that were domesticated there. This map is really helpful for locating where your favorite crop was domesticated. Moving on, we want to talk about the cultures that influence horticulture. The cultures that helped us bridge the gap between being a hunter and gatherer society towards the society we have now. Before we get started, I want to talk and have a little bit of a discussion about how the development of horticulture influenced us. Because if we don't know about how important it is, why would we even want to study the cultures that made it possible? So the first question, no right or wrong answer. What lifestyle would you prefer? A lifestyle of being a hunter and gatherer, or a lifestyle with horticulture as we have today? When you're making your decision, you might want to think about the amount of free time that you have in each different type of society, what your shelter would look like, what your home would look like, what your education looks like in both scenarios, and the economy that exists in both. If we dive in deeper, we can actually realize that a lot of the career paths that we have today would not be possible without horticulture. Because if we didn't have horticulture, we would spend, or more of us would spend a lot of time thinking about how to produce food, how to grow food. We would think more, and we would work more towards getting the food that we need. But because our horticulture industry is so advanced now, most of us think very little on a day-to-day basis about where our food comes from, or the challenges that the food producers are having with the various crops that we eat every day. So, which lifestyle, a hunter-gatherer society or a horticulture society, can have a higher population? I think that it's probably pretty clear by now, but a society with horticulture can support a much higher population. Which one has a higher total diet diversity? This one's a little bit complicated because it really depends on the horticulture society. The first horticulture society's fault actually was because of their low diet diversity. Nutritionists nowadays really emphasize the importance of high diet diversity. And these days, the diversity of food available to us is very great. However, the amounts of food that each individual eats, the diversity of a specific diet, can sometimes be really low. So the diet diversity of the first horticulturists was very low, which caused a lot of issues for them. Diet diversity availability is very high these days, but a lot of people aren't getting the diversity in their diet that they need, which can be a problem. List issues associated with both environmental, social, sustainable. So think about that on your own. A few things that I'll mention is that a problem with the advanced horticulture society we have today is that a lot of us have very sedentary lifestyles. So back when people were hunting and gathering, they were spending a lot of time outside, a lot of physical activity, a lot of moving around, and so their bodies were much stronger. Nowadays, we don't have to do as much work with gathering our food. We don't have to hike long distances to get the food that we need for our families. So it's affecting our bodies and the strength of our bodies. So we have to do other things to make sure that we are getting the strength that we need. All right, let's go through a few different cultures. The one that I want to talk about first is Egyptians. And they really offered a lot to horticulture, mainly with their advancements in irrigation techniques. They also had formal gardens and really interesting ways to prepare the land, but the irrigation is the most interesting to me. They actually had hydraulic engineering, which really, as you understand, Irrigation techniques means the use of water, basically rerouting water for watering the crops that we need. So irrigation is watering plants, and that is not rain-fed agriculture. So a lot of us, for our gardens, may rely on rain, but if it doesn't rain, we know that we need to irrigate. So Egyptians were really a part of the movement of modern-day irrigation. They were really ahead of the times. They also cultivated a lot of vegetables, including lettuce, melons, cucumber, and garlic. They also developed a lot of spices and perfumes. Horticulture goes hand in hand with culture, and you may know that Egyptians have a lot of ancient Egypt had a lot of traditions with spices and perfumes. And so those spices and perfumes had to come from somewhere, and the horticulture industry is where they came from. So they really added to spices and perfumes in the horticulture industry. The pre-Incas of Peru are considered the first people to grow maize or corn. And they also cultivated potatoes, sweet potatoes, peppers, avocados, beans, tomatoes, and cocoa. I want to stop and talk about an ancient agriculture technique called the Three Sisters. This technique is accredited to the Mayans, who used this multi-cropping practice. So, as I said before with the agroforestry, certain plants grow better when they're together than if they're alone. So the Three Sisters are corn, squash, and beans. And when they grow together, they will do better than if they're alone. So each sister plays a specific role. Corn acts as an infrastructure, so to say, for the beans to grow up. The squash grows around these other two sisters and shades out the area so that weeds can't grow. So there is a barrier. The bean has this magic power, if you will, that takes nitrogen from the air and to gas and converts it into a form of nitrogen that plants can use for their nutrition. So the Three Sisters, corn, squash, and beans, each of them plays a role so that this technique works really well for producing these three crops together. Moving on with cultures, ancient Greece is noted for writings in botany, horticulture, and forestry, along with taxonomy. They developed studies with toxicology, realizing which plants were toxic, which weren't. Very important to write about these things and share them with future generations. They also cultivated herbs for medicinal purposes. They had a hard time progressing their horticulture industry because of their shallow soils. They had a lot of erosion, which means the washing away of soils due to rain and wind. They had poor conservation practices. They weren't taking good care of the soil. They had a large population to feed, putting a lot of stress on the soil, really a part of the equation of that culture. Its downfall with horticulture. Persian Gardens is another technique that was given by the Persian culture, which is really an interesting garden formation that's still used today. Ancient Persia was in part of it was in very dry areas, and as you can imagine, it's hard to grow food in really dry areas. But if you can create an oasis, so to say, with your gardening technique. So what this technique does is it basically creates an enclosed area, kind of like a greenhouse, by planting trees outside, which increases the amount of shade in that area, so that decreases the temperature. So you're getting a cooler temperature. Then they put a fountain, waterways, in between those trees, which increases the humidity. Okay, so you're creating this basically oasis in this dry area where you have shade, cooling the climate, and you have a fountain, increasing the humidity. That allows you to grow plants that you couldn't normally grow outside of the area, really increasing productivity. Really interesting technique. Let's talk a little bit about the Roman Empire. They flourished because of borrowing horticulture techniques from other cultures. They also developed their own techniques such as grafting and budding. They did some fertility testing, some greenhouse structures, and they also used gardens to show status. Okay, so having an orchard or a beautiful formal garden showing different status, such as rank. Wealthy homes had beautiful roses, pansies, violets, beautiful flowers in their area to show status as a symbol. In the Renaissance era, we have this rebirth of science discovery, wanting to study the morphology of plants, the anatomy of plants, starting to do a lot more drawings and writings about plant diversity. Very interesting to the time. There's also a large development of landscapes, gardens, and irrigation systems in the Renaissance era. A notable scientist that I want to talk about, because he was really pivotal for the naming system that we have in plants, is Linnaeus. So who is he? He was a Swedish botanist living from 1707 to 1776, and he developed the binomial system for classifying plants. He classified plants based on flowering, or what we call sexual characteristics, so drawing the flowers, putting plants into different families using what their flowers look like, or their sexual structures. So flowers are sexual structures of plants. This is a huge overview, a lot of time to cover, and obviously we're not doing justice to each culture, but we're kind of just doing a brief overview. I want to talk briefly about agriculture in America. You've seen on the map previously that crops were domesticated all over the world, and if we really think about it, horticulture or agriculture didn't just start in one place, it started all over the world. But we're going to focus in here on the developments of horticulture that really led to the horticulture industry that we have right now in the United States. There was agriculture and horticulture occurring in the United States before Columbus. So Native Americans were cultivating food. They were also gathering food, but clear evidence of food cultivation. In 1493, Columbus began an exchange of plants between Europe and the Americas, which really changed the landscape of horticulture, because plants that were domesticated in Europe were now coming to the Americas and vice versa. In 1607, the Virginia colony, Jamestown, we have the cultivation of large-scale tobacco. In 1620, we have Plymouth colony. We have the Three Sisters techniques being used. We have wheat, barley, rye, and oats introduced. And then, skipping ahead, in 1701, we have the first egg machine, which was a seed drill invented by Jethro Tull. This was really a start of the mechanization era, so seed drill is used for planting seeds. In 1793, we have the invention of the cotton gin, again, another wave of change within the horticulture industry. Here's a picture of the cotton gin. In 1797, the first cast iron plow was patented. In 1843, Sir John Laws invented commercial fertilizer, another change within the ability for us to grow plants on a large scale. In 1865, we have the amendment making slavery illegal, the 13th Amendment, very important for the shift in more equality in the horticulture and agriculture industry. As many of you know, there was a lot of inequality within the labor force of horticulture and agriculture before and even after this amendment, since there was a lot of slavery in agriculture. After 1865, we have a real shift of people who were slaves, now newly free people, and who didn't have employment. Okay, so they weren't employed before, but they did get like food from the farmers, places to live. So there was this shift, and although it was a great thing to have freedom, where do people go? So we have this increase of sharecropping with newly free people and also poor white people beginning to do sharecropping, which is when you live and grow food on land, but it's not yours. So you have to share the crop that you grow, that you produce, with the landowner. This is a good system for getting people on their feet, but it also leaves a lot of room for inequality and injustice. Skipping forward within the horticulture industry, I want to mention Liberty Hyde Bailey, who is considered the father of horticulture in the United States. He lived from 1858 through 1954, and he's an author, a taxonomist, an educator, and an administrator. He actually founded the American Society for Horticulture Science, and he did a lot of writings in horticulture and really began this shift in the scientific area of horticulture. Moving on in history, we have the 1862, the Homestead Act, the USDA was established, and the Morrill Act, 3 acts that were incredibly important for the change of agriculture in the United States. First off, Homestead Act was a law that allowed or encouraged people to move west of the Mississippi. There was this program that said if you basically become a homesteader, you move out usually west, and you get an area of land and you do horticulture and agriculture there. If you're there for a certain amount of years, that land will then be transferred legally into your name. So it's this program that the government was giving away land to encourage people to move out west and to cultivate land there. Very interesting act. The USDA was also established. I just want to mention that the Homestead Act really shifted agriculture, which was really important, into this fertile land that the West had to offer. Very exciting times. And then the establishment of the USDA, an organization to basically oversee this industry of growing food in the United States. And then the Morrill Act, which initiated the land-grant institutions in the United States, these universities that added a lot of value to the scientific study of horticulture. Then in 1869, we had the Transcontinental Railroad completed, which is incredibly important for the transportation of the produce that the homesteaders were growing in the western areas to shipping that to eastern areas. Imagine it just opened a whole new opportunities of the crops that people could grow and how those crops could get to the people, the end users, the consumers. In 1910, we have disease-resistant plants being introduced, so a lot more work with plant improvement being done, some of that thanks to the land-grant institutions that were established in the 1862. Then we have really a vast expansion of agriculture, more productive agriculture than ever, thanks to all these advancements that we've talked about. Then we have this sudden wake-up call, which we can call the Dust Bowl, is that farmers in America were growing at such high productive rates. They were converting natural areas such as prairies into agriculture, and they had done it very fast. And wake-up call was really this, what we call the Dust Bowl, is when we had a lot of storms, a lot of wind was blowing up the soil and creating these dust storms, or called dust bowls. It was a result of poor agronomic land stewardship, which was as a result of increasing production at a very high rate, tearing up of prairies and natural areas, and people realized that if they weren't going to stop those old practices, that the land would not be sustainable and agriculture would not continue at a healthy rate in the United States. So in 1935, the government founded the Soil Conservation Service, which is a a part of the United States Department of Agriculture, and it focuses on natural resources and developing techniques to help farmers be better stewards of the land. So very important. Why was it started? Because of the 1930s Dust Bowl. So some things that bad happen in history can really encourage change. Moving forward, in 1972, we have advancements that, thanks to Berg, for the ability to transfer genes. In 1980, the first American patent was patented for bacteria use to clean up oil spills. So we have this advancements in science happening, 70s, 80s, and 90s. In 1994, we have the first transgenic crop approved for sale in the United States, the Flavor Saver tomato. In 1996, we have the first weed and insect-resistant crops introduced commercially. So we have this vast expansion of our understanding of genetics that is able to change the crops that we grow. Other research was being done on farms and at universities alike to advance the science of horticulture and agriculture, and in turn helping the productivity of farmers. So we had new cultivars developed by plant breeders. We had more efficient irrigation systems. Nowadays we have a better understanding of plant responses to light and temperature that allows us to maximize growth and change growth in greenhouses. We also have new types of fertilizer and a better understanding of soil-plant relationships. There's also been advancements in integrated pest management practices. The ability for us to control plant pests with minimal negative impacts on the environment has really improved. There's also been an advancement of our understanding of plant hormones that result in us being able to control plant growth more and plant development. We also have an expanded knowledge of post-harvest physiology of crops, so we understand how to prevent plants or crops from going bad, which reduces food waste and increases the shelf life, or how long the horticulture crops last on the shelf. So with this ever-expanding green industry, there's a lot of excitement and more changes happening every day. Really quickly, I want to go over who is monitoring this ever-expanding green industry. Who makes sure that things are happening at a healthy pace, and who makes sure that things are being regulated? The answer to that is the United States Department of Agriculture. It's the government organization that monitors and measures the green industry, the horticulture industry, and the agriculture industry. So there's a lot more to learn about the USDA, but that's about all I'll say right now. USDA is often thought to just help farmers, but the USDA budget is a lot more than that. So the Farm Bill, you may have heard of that. Very large bill, lots of money, looks like it's going to farmers, which a lot of money is being invested in farmers, increasing their productivity through research and programs for education. But the USDA's budget is a lot greater than that, including the Nutrient Assistant Program, which is actually 69% of the budget. Farm and commodity programs is only around 18%. Conservation and forest projects are around 7%. So you can see that the USDA is working on a lot of different things. So today we talked about the history of horticulture, how it's changed over time, and we talked about cultures that have added to it, and hopefully you have a better understanding now of how we've shifted from a society of hunting and gathering or agroforestry into a society where we don't think very much about where our food comes from. So a lot of historical points have happened to get to the point where we are, and we still need to think about horticulture and agriculture because our food is so intimate to us. We need to know where it comes from. We also need to appreciate those farmers that are working tirelessly, those gardeners, those horticulturists that are working tirelessly, so that we don't have to think or work as much on our food on a daily basis. If you have any questions, feel free to comment or email me, and I hope that you have a great day. See you next time.